So, to get started today, my guest today is Anurima Bhargava, and we're talking about the case of Mahmoud Khalil and the larger First Amendment rights issues that are going to be affecting all documentary filmmakers. I'm going to talk about the details of the case more in a minute. But Anurima, first of all, thank you for being here. Thanks for doing this. Your first Substack Live. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Uh, I want to start with your background. You're a lawyer and you also produce documentary films. You're a Columbia grad, and you were on the campus last spring witnessing the student encampment that was protesting Israel's war in Gaza. In your past, you've worked as a lawyer at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and at the U.S. Department of Justice, both for several-year stints. Can you briefly explain how those experiences give you a perspective on what's happening in the Mahmoud Khalil case over his civil rights?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate the chance to be here. It's been a very tough week, and I'm glad that we can. And frankly, part of the reason it's been a tough week is I think we're getting a lot of inquiries from students and from faculty on campuses who feel very unsafe right now, and also from those in our documentary and journalism communities that also are feeling pressures about how it is that they're even being able to share some of those stories. And so, just by way of background, as you mentioned, my job at the Justice Department was. To lead civil rights enforcement on colleges and universities and in schools, and so in so many ways, what is happening, having the university campuses and frankly our K through 12 schools being the focal point of a battleground around what we're allowed to say, how we're allowed to share our voices, the silencing, the suggestion that certain things are no longer going to be part of our histories, and the erasure, but also the erasure that's happening right now by instilling the kind of fear that is the whole point of all of this, from the federal government and the administration, is to keep people from being able to actually live and to live their whole selves, and to be able to even just engage in a way that our universities for so long were that was their purpose, and certainly should be today. So I come from that perspective. I obviously come from the perspective also of being a fellow documentary filmmaker who, and the focus of the much of the documentary work that I have done, and many on this call who have joined have done, has been to find ways in which to lift up the stories of the very kinds of stories that the administration is trying to silence right now. And I think from that perspective, and the perspective of seeing and being around a lot of the filmmakers and students, right, who were on Columbia's campuses and on campuses around the country, who are, to get today facing not only the threats of deportation and the federal government coming after them, but frankly, no support from their own college campuses. I think that vantage point of having been there, seeing, how do we tell these stories if we can't protect, we don't have a sense of how we can protect ourselves. So that's why I think it's just really important for us to have this conversation, both in terms of what's happening with Mahmoud Khalil, which I think that his story is all of our stories, because they're really tiny steps from going from the attacks on undocumented people, to those who have green cards, to those who are naturalized citizens, to those who are citizens, right? In terms of our ability to exercise our constitutionally protected rights, but also from the documentary film community, which is such an important part of both of our lives, and how we walk in the world.
So let's get into the details of Khalil's case. I'm among the people who had never heard of him a week ago. Now, a lot more has been written about him. He's a 30-year-old graduate of the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia. He's of Palestinian descent and holds a green card as a lawful permanent resident. He's married to an American woman who's due to give birth to their child in a few weeks. And last Saturday, he was arrested by ICE agents in New York without being charged of any crime, and then transported to a detention center in Louisiana that cuts him off from contact with his lawyer, his wife, and other supporters. President Trump has said this is just the beginning of more detentions and deportations to come. Um, how is this case unique to anything we've seen before?
In many different ways. So I think the we have not seen a situation in which someone has not been charged. There is literally no legal. There's he's not being charged with breaking any law. He's not. He doesn't have any history of having had any kind of run-ins with the law. And so this is a student. I mean, I think it's a very simple moment, right? Which is this is a student who in so many ways was his presence on campus was one of trying to really be a liaison between students and the administration. He's someone who has constructively engaged. There is not even an assertion, and there hasn't been anything that anyone has brought up of like statements that he has made that ring true in terms of what the kind of assertions are of him being pro Hamas, about him, of him, doing anything. And I'll get to like what they're trying to claim, that he's doing anything that might actually threaten the security of anyone around him or or the United States in any way. So the sense is right that the reason why Mahmoud Khalil is in the situation that he is currently in is because he on part of what happened at Columbia in the last couple of weeks is that there have been protests at Barnard and in the early part of March, and Mahmoud was one of the people who was not masked at those protests. And one of the things that is very dangerous about what's happening, and Mahmoud and others have filed a case about this in the last 24 hours, is that there is information about students that is being shared with members of Congress, with the federal government, and so you have a very concerted and intentional effort to target, to harass, to dox, and now to use our immigration apparatus to go after students who have done nothing other than peacefully protest and try and engage this administration, the administration of the university, but also the United States and the global community as a whole on things that are of vital importance to them, and so that's the way in which this is incredibly unique, which is that there is no there's nothing being asserted by anyone. There's this claim that he was passing out flyers, but no one's seen him, and they've seen the flyers, and so that's one piece. The second piece is that. There have been threats, and there have been threats for quite some time that by the Trump administration that folks who are here on student visas and otherwise better watch it in terms of how it is that they're engaging on campuses. And so, as the story has been shared by his wife and by others, when the ICE agents who were not, who were in plain clothes, so you can imagine the horror of this, um, when they came to the door and were told that he had a green card and not a visa, they were both they were like, wait a minute, and checked, and the answer was like, we're still going to pick him up. And frankly, they were still going to pick up his wife even though she was a US citizen for interfering as well, right? So here's the point, which is like, it doesn't, at some point the all bets are off on like who it is that they're picking up and what status someone has. And it's very clear from the US District Court Judge Jesse Furman, who has the sort of temporary restraining order and the habeas petition, which basically means there's an attempt to make sure that his deportation does not happen and that he's brought back to New York. That very clear from Jesse Furman that like, you cannot deport someone who has a green card without a proper legal proceeding, right? And so, not to get too legal, and I'm going to get out of the legal part of this because I think there's much more important ways in which we can talk about what's happening. But because they don't have anything they can charge him with, because there's nothing that he's done that is illegal, the claim now being made is that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is going to use a provision that has never been used anywhere close to this, would suggest that like the reason he was picked up is because he is a security threat to the security of the United States, right? So the suggestion that you can just fabricate without evidence this kind of claim is something, again, when I say we should all be worried about it, right? We should all be worried about it because it means that any one of us on any given moment could the suggestion could be that we were sitting and protesting and using our constitutional rights, and someone will claim otherwise, and that's going to be a basis for you to be detained, you know, a few weeks before your baby is being born, right? So that's a couple pieces of it. The other thing is I just want to speak to, my alma mater, which I could not be more horrified since 2023 at the way in which Columbia has engaged with its students. And this is just the latest chapter in that. And part of the reason that I'm horrified is because you can't get on Columbia's campus right now without a QR code passing through security. Like it's literally a gated fortress. And the idea that they're just letting ICE agents wander around when Mahmoud Khalil, as an example, right, was very worried about his own safety, asked Columbia to help him the day before he was picked up, and they did nothing, right? And so the suggestion that like you're on a university campus again today, in the last 24 hours, not today, but the last 24 hours, we've seen two raids on the raiding of two students in university housing, and ICE agents going to their rooms. Like, if you're just going to basically put open season on your students and not allow them to have the protections that they should be afforded on your campus, that's another piece of this that I think is very concerning, is the abdication in higher education of any kind of protections for not only your students but your faculty.
So, during the student protests last spring, you were on campus witnessing a lot of what was going on. What were you taking in, and I guess specifically if you had encounters with Mahmoud Khalil, what were you taking in?
I was taking in what was actually happening, which was spaces that had been created and sustained with a lot of care by students to engage one another. Part of what we saw, even on the encampments, were to me, community guidelines about how people interact in those spaces, how you enter those spaces, how you engage in them. That I think we all have a lot to learn from, which is that it was in the long tradition of universities being spaces where you come to try and understand one another, where you come in a way that like you can spark debate, you can say things, you can even say things that are really hard for others to hear, and that there's some constructive ways and spaces that are built to be able to do that. And unfortunately, I think the reason this all started and we could have had a very different trajectory here is that rather than allow for that space to exist, Columbia came and arrested its own students. I mean, asked the NYPD to arrest its own students with no charges for any of those students other than they were on an encampment, right? And it's a silly moment where you're sitting there saying like we're going to suspend someone for in some ways we're going to suspend, or we say that they're trespassing because they're suspended, but you can't suspend them until after you have noted that they're trespassing. It's a chicken and egg problem, right? Like they weren't trespassing when they were still on campus, and so they can't be suspended for that. And so you arrested them for something that is pretty routine for what we see on campuses. I think the impact on students even now. I mean, the last 2 months we've seen very little in terms of student protest of anything that the Trump administration is up to. And I think part of the reason for that is because students are like, why would I do this, right? Because if I don't know what it is that I might be engaged in, or what it is I might say that might get me in doxxed and harassed and my information shared, then why would I like put myself out there? And I think that's the piece that that is really you know the norms and standards of what it is that we're saying to young people, how they can engage, and what we're saying to ourselves about how we can engage is changing dramatically. And that's, I think, one of the lasting impacts of what we saw on Columbia's campus. But for me, going back to your question, I saw a lot of students who really were. It was a community that had been built and sustained, that I I thought they were doing a better job, frankly, of dealing with very difficult questions and issues than most adults I knew were. And so I saw something that even the day that they took over Hamilton Hall, I was there all day. Like I filmed every half an hour because it was a very peaceful, like, conversations happening everywhere. People are wandering around. There's formals going on with people wearing tuxes and dresses, and they're right outside of the hall as students were taking over. Like the ways in which this has been described as this sort of violent or situation. Look, the kids went in at 12:30 at night to a hall. There was plenty of campus safety folks around. No one stopped any of that. They knew it was coming. They knew exactly what was happening, and they waited until the next night, until night fell, before they took in like hundreds of cops in riot gear to come in and go after a bunch of kids in their pajamas. Like that's the story of like what's going on in a lot of ways. And I think um, Mahmoud Khalil is one of the people who really tried to be a bridge, right, between those who are in the encampment and the administration. And we should be investing in that. We should be supporting that. We should be encouraging that kind of engagement. That's exactly the ways in which we want young people to be showing up. And instead, we're doing the exact opposite.
Well, that's been striking to me since his detention last week. It, despite the rhetoric of Trump and other officials calling Khalil pro-Hamas and dangerous and other things, people who know him have a much different description. There's a Columbia professor Joseph Howley, who's described Khalil as a consummate diplomat and someone who's dedicated to finding peaceful agreements to conflicts. Um, Sarah Kunzler, the lawyer and filmmaker, had written a post that you shared on your Instagram, where she points out that Khalil had given an interview to CNN, where he said that I believe that the liberation of the Palestinian people and the Jewish people are intertwined and go hand by hand. And he said that's to CNN that there's no place for anti-Semitism in the movement. So that's a much different characterization than what's coming through from the Trump administration.
Right. That's the truth of it. And what the Trump administration has is a narrative that has no basis in the truth and has no basis in what it is that's actually going on these campuses. And so they are weaponizing anti-Semitism to come after universities and to come after anyone who is critical of the federal government and the administration. That is and to really dismantle higher education, right? Their goal is quite different here. And many have commented on the fact that the this is their first salvo into this. There will be many more, but the reason they picked out a man, they picked out a man who was Palestinian, they picked out a man who was at Columbia, is in some ways because they thought that if they claimed the pro Hamas, pro Palestine mantra for and came up with a particular narrative that this would be someone who was not sympathetic to many and people wouldn't worry about it so much, right? But unfortunately for them, and I mean we haven't seen as much of this as I would like, but we've certainly seen what has been a very in many ways fractured communities on universities campuses around Israel Palestine. We've seen people come together on this in a different way to say, like, this is not this is not going to be helpful for any of us. And many in the Jewish community and Jewish alums who had been active in frankly efforts to target and to place some restrictions on these students are now saying this is not what we intended, and this is not what we need to have happen here. So I think we're seeing some of that. But again, like Mahmoud Khalil is like as has been the case and will continue to be the case over and over again, is someone who the way in which they've engaged is entirely different than the way in which they are being described and weaponized and characterized. And so there's this is not we see this in every part of our American life, which is how police describe the people that they killed, how people describe anyone who is disagreeing and dissenting from from what it is that they want the world to be, and frankly the ways in which anyone who we want to exclude, to deport, to suggest is not American, we will put whatever we can on them to try and suggest that they are somehow a threat and a terror, and divide and conquer all of us to try to get there. And that's what's playing out here once again.
Um, so I want to kind of think about the larger implications for documentary filmmakers and what this case says about the fragility of First Amendment rights in 2025. I mean, can you reflect on that?
I think they're in as precarious a position as they have ever been, in at least in my lifetime, which is close to 50 years here. I mean, I think we're at a place, and this is freedom of speech, this is freedom of expression, and frankly, it's freedom of the press and journalists and documentarians and everyone else too, right? The suggestion that people can be disappeared for speech and speech alone, which is what this case is suggesting to everyone, is directly contrary to everything that the First Amendment and the Constitution has tried to protect in terms of who we are in America. And so we have seen from the very first day around birthright citizenship that there is an attempt to just render with a stroke of a pen or with a proclamation that things that have been constitutional bulwarks for all of our for the extent of American democracy are somehow going to be wiped away. We can certainly fight those things in court, and I think we will continue to win in court. But the question for all of us is the way in which that seeps into how we think of ourselves and how we think of our ability to exercise those rights. And that's where the when the fear starts setting into people and there's a suggestion that we can't engage in free speech or expression without fear, that's doing a lot of the work that they want to do already, even if these rights continue to be protected in court, which I think ultimately will happen here.
Um, what can people watching this do, in your view, to stand up to this encroachment on First Amendment rights?
I think we continue to invest, encourage, support, show up, and to certainly tell our young people, whether it be that you yourself are in that category, you have children or family or those who are working on your film teams, whatever that might be, that we continue to say that like the exercise of our rights, of our ability to protest, of our ability to speak, of our ability to voice dissent, that we continue to do those things. I think and do them in force. I think I felt it's been really important for me even to show up in multiple places this week, in part to make sure we realize like those who do actually have far more than I myself as a U.S. citizen feel like I have at stake at the moment, right? That they know that we're all showing up with them, because I think that's the first part of it, is that we continue to exercise our constitutionally protected freedoms, and we do not allow for the suggestion that those freedoms, that there's anything that they can be balanced with, right? Like that somehow or another, that because of even feeling, for those who feel um, the level of hate, the level of fear that a lot of people in the country are feeling right now, that even if someone's engaged in speech that you feel like might be exacerbating that still we recognize that the way to move forward then is to actually be able to do what we've always done, which is to call that out, to debate, to voice, to be able to tell our stories, to be able to say that, like, to be able to have people like Mahmoud Khalil's story, his wife's story. Those are stories that we should know, and we should not listen, and not give credence to a very different kind of narrative. And I think so. I hope that we all continue to do everything we can to support each other and to make us feel like we're not alone. I got a lot of messages in the last couple days from filmmakers who are really quite scared, including some on Columbia's campus, student journalists and others. And I think we need to support each other every day in whatever way we can, to continue to be able to lift those voices up, because the more that those voices are lifted up, the more it's harder. I think in some ways for this administration to continue to sort of try and think that they can play whack-a-mole with our lives.
Well, that was the effort that we're trying to make here on our Doc Voices platform. Pure Nonfiction is, try to give expression to some of the things going on. I really appreciate you coming on today to talk about this case. For others who are watching, if you have other topics or filmmakers that you'd like to see us cover in the future, please write to us on Substack. We will be putting this video up so that if anyone missed it live, you can watch it in the archive. Thanks everyone for watching. Anurima, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks. And Tom, I just want to say to everyone here,
Yeah.
if there are ways in which people are feeling feeling that level of fear or pressure, I hope we can also, please reach out, and I hope we can figure out some ways in which we can be supportive and actually provide some guidance and advice to folks too. So that's something we're working on. But I do not want, um, you know I want the documentary film community to feel that they have some supports in whatever way, not only in the ways in which you're providing, Tom, the kinds of spaces you're providing it, and also for us to have some ways in which we can feel safe and secure in our work. So we're continuing to work on that, but please reach out.
A lot of work to do. Thank you very much, Anurima.